here, you won't be able to hear me, or I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear me when I go into the booth, but I will be able to
Hello, good evening to you all. My name is Nadia Danton. I'm one of the moderators of the Caribbean Film Academy alongside Eddie Martinez. I'm delighted to be presenting this evening's session, Funding and Financing in the Caribbean. Over the next 90 minutes, I will engage with my esteemed panel about the best ways to access finance. Whilst I'm joining you from London, this year, the Caribbean Film Academy is streaming to you live from its home in Miami, Florida. When the Caribbean Film Academy started out in a storefront on Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn in 2012, it was with the very specific aim of promoting and supporting Caribbean filmmaking and filmmakers in the region and the diaspora. Now under the auspices of the Third Horizon Film Festival, the Caribbean Film Academy has evolved into an expansive virtual seminar aimed at introducing filmmakers and producers from across the region and its diaspora to the international film landscape. This session is presented in partnership with Playgo Emerge, Digicel, and Firelight Media, and we would like to thank these partners for their much appreciated support. We'd like to thank our founding sponsor, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, for believing in the vision and mission of Third Horizon and helping us to cultivate cutting-edge Caribbean storytellers across the diaspora. We also extend our deep gratitude to Just Film's Ford Foundation for their transformative support of our organization. Before we start, I wanted to say a few words of housekeeping. Like the rest of the Third Horizon Film Festival, we at the Caribbean Film Academy sessions want to be as accessible to the widest audience possible. As such, this event is being simultaneously translated into French, Spanish, and Haitian Creole and broadcasted live on YouTube and Facebook. Many thanks to our dedicated team of interpreters. To boost interaction, please put your questions in the chat. I will endeavor to direct as many of these as possible to our panel and to weave these into the conversation. Without further delay, I would like to introduce my panel, which includes Fanny Hook, Jesus Hernandez, Ineka Luke, Sebastian Onomo, Renee Robinson, and Tony Bell. Fanny Hook has diverse experience in the production of films, TV, web series, advertisement, and theatre. For the past 6 years, she has been serving as a curator and programmer for a number of film festivals in Panama. She is the co-founder of La Subterránea, a Panamanian film distribution agency. Jesus Hernandez has a BFA in film directing from the University of Arts in Havana. In New York, where he is currently based, he coordinated Documentary Fortnight at MoMA and worked at the Nantucket Film Festival. He founded Back Media, which has several projects in the US and in Cuba in different stages of development. Ineka Luke is a Caribbean-based consultant and Fulbright scholar with 15 years plus of senior management experience in strategic film industry development, film festival management, communications, corporate brand management, and business development across private, public, and non-profit sectors. Ineka is an associate of Olsberg SPI, a London-based creative industry strategy consultancy. Sebastian Onomo is a French producer with a degree in modern literature obtained from the Sorbonne. He is the founder of Special Touch Studios, experts in audiovisual and digital production. He is an advisor for international funds and also co-president of the French-speaking group Unifrance. Renee Robinson is a film commissioner of Jamaica and an orange economy expert, content strategist, and thought leader. She has worked in Canada, Europe, the US, Africa, and the Caribbean in film, television, and digital. Tony Bell is the impact strategist for Looky Looky Pictures. She has been a featured speaker, pitch mentor, and industry representative at festivals and events such as Hot Docs, Sheffield Doc Fest, Korea Communications Agency, Big Sky, and many more. She is the former filmmaking service manager at the International Documentary Association. Welcome to my panel. So just to kick off the conversation, Ineka, I wondered if you could give us a rundown on what the current landscape and state of play is with regards to accessing finance in the Caribbean region, and also for um, Caribbean cultural work in the wider international market.
Well, good evening, everyone. Nadia, thanks for the intro and for having me here. Um, I would say certainly in the Caribbean, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Across the Caribbean, we are very much in a state of development when it comes to the film and television sector. I think my colleague Renee, who's here from Jamaica, can certainly speak to Jamaica, but there are different levels of development across the region when it comes to the film industry and specifically to financing. I think the main thing I would point out at this time is the presence of the ability for people to access incentives. In Trinidad and Tobago, there's a rebate incentive that can be accessed by both locals and people coming into the country to shoot. You also have incentives in the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, in Dominican Republic, in Puerto Rico, etc. Generally, the way people tend to make films in the Caribbean, as listeners would know, is that it tends to be pulled together from private sources, within your pocket, and also from government sources. So it's a bit of a mixed bag at this point in time. And I think one of the things that we certainly are looking at how we can address, let's say on a macro scale, is the question of a more streamlined approach to accessing funding and financing in the Caribbean. Caribbean people can also access funds abroad, World Cinema Fund, for example. And these are some of the things that it would be good to also bring out in this discussion, that there are funds and forums that people can access, even though you're based in the Caribbean, that you do have access to. So that would require a little bit of research to kind of identify the ones that we do have access to. But it's right now, I would say it's a bit of a mixed bag.
And you will refer to the fact that there are co-production arrangements and so on in the region. I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about which countries have incentives and schemes that make it attractive to shoot in those locations.
So primarily Trinidad and Tobago, there's a cash-based rebate of up to 35% for productions that want to come in, with an additional 20% for hiring local labor. So if you are based across the Caribbean, you could, let's say, look at Trinidad and Tobago as a possible, or finding out a co-producer in Trinidad and Tobago to be able to access those funds and those resources. In terms of formal co-production treaties, Jamaica is the only one that I'm aware of in the Caribbean that has a formal co-production treaty with the UK, and certainly Renee can speak more to that. That obviously will open up some opportunities for people based in Jamaica to be able to access funds and resources there. And just in general, the idea of looking at incentives as a means of accessing more resources than you have, let's say, in your space or in your country. So the idea of looking at, let's say, spaces like this or festivals like this, where you can do networking with other producers, when we can all be together again, the idea of which festivals can I go to? The Panama Film Festival, I think, would also be a great option in the region to be able to find people to pool resources with. And just on a global scale, there are nearly 100 automatic incentives in place across the world. So if you're even looking beyond the region, the idea of looking for a co-producer, let's say in France or in the UK itself, those options are some of the things I would certainly recommend, because it opens up your world in terms of what kind of financing or resources you can access. So going out there and looking for producers or co-producers is certainly a good option to broaden the potential options for resources. And I would mention as well, Nadia, that there is I've left a resource with the group, and I believe it's going to be posted on the website, which is an aggregate of all the incentives that we are aware of across the world. It's nearly 100 of them. And that would be a good resource for people to access, to start to see, okay, if I want to shoot if I live in Trinidad, but I want to shoot in Morocco, or I want to shoot in Austria, what are the incentives there? And can I now start the process of looking for someone there to work with?
Thank you. I mean, certainly the idea of that list with over 100 different sources and so on is really powerful. I mean, I can imagine there are people who are watching this now, and that could be really, defining for them in terms of their financing plans. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about, certainly in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, tapping into those incentives. Because, you know, if you're an emerging filmmaker, someone who perhaps doesn't have a lot of experience or resources, it can be quite daunting, sort of understanding how to go about tapping into these incentives. I wonder if you could sort of give us a bit of a step-by-step of how, generally speaking, a novice would go about applying.
Sure. I would always, certainly one of the things that I would recommend as a former film commissioner of Trinidad and Tobago is start with the film commission or the film office in your country. The film commission's role is to not only attract productions to that particular location, but also in a lot of instances, their role is also to develop the infrastructure, the resources on the ground for local filmmakers and creatives. So I would say, as a matter of course, if you're not currently in touch with your local film commission, I think that's always a good place to start, because the film commission tends to be a sort of a central aggregate of all that kind of information when it comes to making films. Film commissions often will have production directories or a list of persons who work in the film industry or in the space in that particular location. And that would be a good place to find, okay, I know I want to find somebody who, so let's say, for example, you are purely director writer. That's where you are most comfortable, but you would need to find a producer who can help you to walk through the steps to turn your idea or the art into the potential for something that can be sold and something that can have an impact and find its audience. Certainly finding a producer, I think, is a great place to start. And the Film Commission as an agency is that first step to kind of find the resources that you need. In Trinidad and Tobago, and I think certainly in a lot of the places I've seen, you often have to work with, if you're coming into that location, then you have to work with a local production company in order to access the incentives anyway. So the next thing would be to find producers who have experience accessing the rebates. So it's not on you necessarily to know everything there is to know. The websites of film commissions will, or the agencies that are managing these incentives will always have information there, but the producers who have the experience with actually going through the steps, knowing what to do, what the resources are that need to be pulled in, you will always be able to find that information there. So work with the producers on the ground who have the experience. And I think those are the main things in terms of a starting point. If you know you want to shoot, let's say you want to come to Trinidad and Tobago to shoot, start with the Film Commission and find resources through them. They're often the ones who are administering the film incentive. That's certainly the case here in Trinidad and Tobago. And find the producers on the ground, often through the Film Commission, who can actually help walk you through the process of applying for the rebate.
Thank you. Renee, I wanted to bring you in at this point. So we heard about the co-production that Jamaica has. I wondered if you could talk us through what some of the successes have been or how accessible the treaty has been, and what are some of the sort of practical ways that you would suggest filmmakers think about engaging with something like the co-production treaty.
Thank you, Nadia, and hi, good afternoon, everybody, wherever in the world you are. It is a pleasure to be here. Third Horizon, definitely one of my favorite film festivals. So thank you for having me. So Nika started out talking about what a mixed bag it is in terms of access to financing for film producers in the Caribbean, and I really have to agree with that, and even in particular with the co-production treaty. So as it stands, Jamaica is currently the only Caribbean territory that has an official co-production treaty, and to be honest, it is an extremely underutilized tool. And I think that that's because we've seen a lot of gaps in the way the policy implementation structure has happened for us. But I want to also just highlight that in the process of managing a co-produced production, you don't technically need to have an official treaty. So there's ways to do unofficial treaty status or co-ventures or other types of structures that actually don't require for there to be a specific national official co-production treaty between those countries. So, you know, one of the challenges with the treaties is that even for the Caribbean, so for Jamaica, as the minimum parity, we're still responsible for coming up with 20% of the production budget, which is standard across any treaty, most of these co-production treaties. And what we find is that because our ecosystem in the Caribbean is still looking at the creative economy as extremely risky, so in the absence of a particular public fund, which many of our countries just honestly do not have, so in the absence of these public funds, how do we then translate that risk aversion into something that we can work with our local investors and our local financiers to start to supplement for that 20%? So we have definitely seen some ways in which there are gaps in the implementation. The other thing I want to raise as well about the treaty status is that, and this actually is a benefit for the CARIFORUM countries as a whole. So this is not per se a co-production treaty, but there is also the economic partnership agreement between CARIFORUM and the EU, which allows for preferential treatment of audiovisual works. Now, again, there are parameters around this, and you have to still be able to come up with the 20%. You do need to be able to find a producing partner in Europe. You need to be able to access through the right specific types of channels with the institutions. And so there's a lot of regulations around these things, but I think we're starting to uncover more and more that the fact that these entities and these vehicles exist means that the real work that faces us right now is figuring out the best way to operationalize them.
Thank you. I mean, it sounds really complex, even just listening to you talking and explaining. And I can imagine for, many a creative-minded filmmaker, the thought of it is just really heavy. What are some of the practical steps they could take? So if someone wants to, engage with Jamaica and they're interested, in getting some support, looking at how they can navigate this treaty or even other options, what are some of the sort of tips and suggestions that you would give?
Well, I would support a lot of what Nika has already mentioned. So working with your film commission or with your industry association. In Jamaica, there is the Jamaica Film and TV Association, which is JAFTA, which is the industry body that individual practitioners are encouraged to be members of. There's also, I know Filmco in Trinidad exists, and there's other similar types of industry associations within our other islands as well. So definitely start with the institutions, because we do have this, as you said, it can become very complex, and sometimes just knowing that there is an office or an agency or a public sector representative whose role it is to support you as you go through this process. I mean, we work closely with, for example, the BFI in the UK. So, if a project is coming to the Jamaica Film Commission and it's trying to access the co-production agreement, then our first point of contact is going to be to represent that project directly to the BFI. And then we start building it out from there and making sure that it meets all of the eligibility criteria. So definitely starting by working with your representative agencies. A lot of times there are ways in which, to be honest, it's really complicated. You need to be able to, you need to have a good lawyer. You need to have a good accountant. You need to know somebody who understands the ins and outs of international taxation and how that affects the development of a budget, of a project budget. So a lot of these things, which, I think for a long time, we have wanted creatives to be able to be both creative and business, and there's this desire and this need to, okay, well, you have to be able to be a multi-hyphenate. But the reality is that we also really do need to start preparing a cadre of professionals who are in the creative economy, whose purpose it is to advance the business side of things. So I would say if that is the one practical tip that I want to be able to leave with anyone, it is to actually equip yourself. So if you're the author, if you're the writer director, then you need to build your team. You need to be able to build that advocacy with your business development team, whether that is having a strong production, if it is making sure that you have, an accountant who understands these things, or a really, really key lawyer who knows how the ins and outs of these things. So I would say really, like, that is the tip I'd want to leave, is make sure that you have your business people who are with you. And I really feel like it is a lot of our role and our responsibility to start building out that core cadre of professionals who are in the creative economy, whose role and function is to advance business.
Okay, so that's a very good tip, but I want some more. I'm a bit greedy like that. So just stepping back, because I'm mindful we've kind of gone into the deep end talking about treaties, co-productions, etc. And some of that language is no doubt way over a lot of people's heads who are watching this. So just starting off looking more broadly at funding and financing in the region, what would you say are some of the key do's and don'ts based on your experiences?
So I'll contextualize the answer by saying that one of the things that we've been doing at, in the Film Commission side is that we've actually been working with local financiers and investors in Jamaica to help to de-risk that process. So, the same way that we need to be able to help creatives to start understanding the business language, we've also been trying to help business people to understand creative economy and monetization processes there so that they're better able to communicate with each other. And so I think that that's one of the key areas that we do a lot of work in is. And so what I've been seeing in talking to these investors, we've been building out this group of local investors, and some of the things that we've been seeing in those conversations is that a lot of times a creative comes to the pitch process or comes to the table, and yes, they're ready to talk about their story and their script, but the translation into how does that bring you a return on investment? What does that mean for your comparatives? Are you actually looking at, a viable budget? How do you de-risk? Right. And so I know I keep talking about de-risking, but that is really the core thing, is that if you want someone to put money into your project, you need to be able to articulate to them that it's not just an amazing story and it's a great idea, but it's not going to lose them any money. They'll be willing to say, okay, fine, I might not make my money back right away, but I certainly don't want to lose money. And I think that once we start thinking about, okay, well, how can I convince and bring an investor on board so that they understand that you're not going to be losing money on this project because it's part of a greater scheme of things. It's meeting certain comparatives. The budget is comparable. It has an audience. You've been able to identify who that audience is. So all of these types of questions that are, making it easier for your financiers to be an ally for you. Those are some of the areas that we really want to be able to work with creatives to build.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Renee. Ineka, I wanted to draw you back in again around this question of the do's and don'ts in terms of a broad approach to film financing. I've also been given a little note. Our translators are struggling to keep up with our speed. So if we could all sort of slow down our speed just a bit when we're giving our responses, I think they'd much appreciate that.
No problem. So do's and don'ts in terms of, sorry, the question was around investing.
Film financing. So thinking about filmmakers who might be watching this, who are emerging, who might be producing their first feature films, what are some of the basics? We've kind of gone at a high level initially talking about incentives and treaties, but even if we just sort of take the conversation down a notch, just broadly based on your experience and your observations, what are some of the things that you've really observed that you think would be good lessons for, independents watching this to know?
I think one of the things that I've seen, and certainly we can take a page from the, as you mentioned, the independent film business in the US, which is not government funded at all. It's all sort of private funds, obviously, as we know, coming out of the Hollywood studio system. But there is certainly an approach to making films in the US where you sort of cobble your funds together based on what the access that you have. And I think looking at the question of private investors is something I think that could be looked at perhaps more significantly in the Caribbean. I am aware of a few films that have been made in Trinidad and Tobago that have been able to incorporate, usually it's friends and family, but if you look at it as from the point of view of a person with an interest in the film industry who has ready capital that they would want to invest, that they, as Renee rightly said, that they are willing to take that risk for a long term, and they're willing to back you in this project, that you have people in your team who can navigate the conversation around, well, what is my return? And a return could simply be, if you want to make it as basic as possible, a return in the short term could be tickets to the premiere of the film. I've sort of seen that there's usually an interest by investors to want to be a part of an industry like this, and offering them the opportunity to take part in the process, whether it's to come on set and to see what happens behind the scenes, whether it's to, as I said, to be part of a premiere that has a kind of a presence and a feeling of uniqueness and feeling special, that can have an impact on encouraging people to take a chance on your film. So a lot of what happens in the Caribbean is understandable reliance on looking for government funding. It's sort of the post-colonial nature of the world in which we live, that it's often, you know, a ministry or a government fund or an agency. But from a sustainability point of view, you would have to look at, well, you know, if I want to make films for the rest of my life, if this is my career, can I always be able to access government funds? And often that would be the availability of such funds would often be based on whether or not it's available in that particular year. And as we know, government priorities would change, as we've seen for this past year, 15 months, however long it's been. You know, government priorities have had to move toward public health, dealing with the basics of people's livelihoods and shelter, food, etc. So the question of availability of funds for the creative industries would be a bit of a challenge. So I would say, on a basic level, looking around within your network for people who have available cash and might be willing to invest in your production, but at the same time, having people in your team. So it's not just you having a conversation about this great idea you have, but also having someone in your team. And again, tracing that line back to how do you find the resources? If you don't currently have a producer, look through your film commission, check their resources on their website, see if there's a production directory, look for the associations that are let's say the groups of professionals, as Rennie mentioned, Film Co in Trinidad and Tobago, JAFTA in Jamaica, that could be your starting point. And have those conversations with people who have ready funds available so that they might be able to invest. I really think that's something that's not necessarily been looked at before, or let's say for the viability that it could have, because there tends to be a focus in the Caribbean on government funds. I would say take a page from the American independent system, where private investors tend to be the ones who are making these films to happen outside the studio system. And that may be an avenue that can open up a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm particularly in agreement with the point that you make about cultural capital, you know, the ways in which you can sort of, you know, drum up the support, get the enthusiasm by people feeling like they're a part of the film, even if it's just to come to the premiere. At this point, I wanted to bring Fanny into the conversation. Fanny, you're an active jobbing producer in Panama. I wondered what your experience was of working with corporates or bigger organizations, you know, more commercial organizations in terms of support and finance for the kind of work and the films that you have worked on.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Nadia and Temba and Alicia, everybody for the invitation. Just like Nika said, is very mixed. The ways the alternatives that we have to finance a film can vary from private to public, but it depends on the story. Just like she mentioned, there's 100 or more grants, but they're all tailored to a different kind of story. So depending on the stories that I've had the opportunity to work with, the funding and the financing system has been different. I've been lucky enough to see some very special and unique co-productions that were not legitimate, let's say, like officialized. They just happened in spaces like this, happened in markets, happened in festivals, where producers met and developed an exchange of services. I had the experience of working with Dias de Luz, a co-production of 6 Central American countries. And even when it was like a familiar space. They all met each other and they all exchanged their expertise. It had some funding. So it had some funding from the National Panama Fund, which was the major investor. But there are also other very interesting financing opportunities like product placement that nowadays tends to be even more creative. And I know some of the directors are a little, it's hard to just integrate a brand into your creative story, but these are the resources that have been appearing along the way. Also, Historias del Canal is a co-production, but with 5 directors, and it also used private funds, not public funds, but it was a combination of bank and personal funds and a lot of mix and opportunities that they took advantage of. And they were all, these 2 are very successful and part of the last batch of films created in Panama.
And I'm curious, you talked about product placement, which was actually something I was going to ask you about. You kind of read my mind there. I wonder what your experience was of having to incorporate either products or brands into narratives. Like, what tips would you give, if it's the case that a filmmaker is approached or has the opportunity to use a particular product that, on the surface may not seem to fit within the story?
Well, I wasn't the producer of this films, but I was in the process of it. And I think having the script clear and being creative is everything. There are opportunities, but in order to make it attractive and in order to not make it too aggressive or take a lot more of the attention that it should, it needs a producer that is aware of the script in whole. So subtle things like wardrobe or water for the crew or catering, things that are maybe not showcased in the film itself, but that are necessary and vital for the production can be exchanged. Also services like lenses or, it depends on what the story is and what the resources are. It's a wide variety of opportunities, but the important part is to make it as subtle as possible so that it's not easily identifiable by the audience.
And both you, Neka, and Renee have alluded to the way in which you've worked with producers who've, managed to get funds from different parts of the world internationally. Would you say that as a filmmaker based in the Caribbean region, that the search for funds ultimately leads to diaspora? So there tends to be maybe a dependence on whether it be North America or Europe, etc., to get some key aspects of the financing?
Well, it is hard for everyone at this point because of all of the situations that we're going through. But the research needs to be taken with a lot more time in order to find what suits best for your particular story. There are funds only for the Caribbean and Central America that Panama and the International Film Festival of Panama has been developing specifically because there are not enough and because our region is separated, but it complements itself. So there are 3 funds, 3 grants that the Panamanian Film Festival has available for Caribbean countries, and maybe because the dates have been switched a lot because of the situation that we're living in, maybe it's easy to lose track of the deadlines. So maybe that's one thing that looking with enough time for these funds can change. it's still hard. I mean, it's still hard to make a movie, especially in our countries and about the issues that what we are interested to talk about. But there are ways that we can manage to finish it.
Thank you, Fanny. So Tony, I'd like to draw you in at this point. I understand that you have a few comments you wanted to make. I also just want to remind those of you watching, filmmakers, audience members, etc., please do send your comments through in the chat. We are going to filter those through and add those as part of the conversation. Tony, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm zooming in from Los Angeles on the unceded territory of the Tongva and Chumash. I just wanted to make that land acknowledgement and wanted to thank Timba and Chloe and everyone else at Third Horizon for making this event possible. I've learned so much today, and I hope I can convey some knowledge. So I just wanted to give just some practical advice on applying for grants, and particularly as someone who used to review grants all the time. And practical things are making sure that you follow the instructions, because when you're applying for grants, those people who have had the responsibility for reading those applications have a lot of applications to read. It's very important for those applications to be formatted as requested, because they're going through a lot. And if something is not formatted accordingly, even if it's like a font or things aren't in a particular order as requested, then it can really cause a reviewer to pause. And what could also make you ineligible, because what happens is that proposal that you're writing is essentially your first introduction to that funder. And it's letting that funder know, number one, if you can follow instructions, and if this, and also letting that funder know if this is someone I want to work with, like in the long term, because there are other processes that will need to be followed if you were to be awarded that fund. So that's my first bit of practical advice. Number one, making sure you read through the instructions, making sure you format things accordingly, and also like making sure, which Renee mentioned, that you're actually eligible to apply. Because if you are applying for a grant and you're in the Caribbean, but it's only for European filmmakers, then that's really a waste of your time. So just making sure you're eligible to apply. I also want to make a distinction. There's between investors and funders, particularly here in the US, because those two terms have very, very different tax implications here. And investing in documentary has just become a new thing here in the US, I would say about the past 5 years. And when I say investing, I mean people who expect to actually get some type of monetary return on the money that they contribute to your film. And when that became a thing here in the US, people were very enthusiastic about it, but some problems arose, particularly in regards to payments and salaries for the filmmakers. So a lot of times filmmakers would enter into these agreements with the investors, and then money would come in, but they would be obligated to give that money immediately to investor. And filmmakers have been working on films for years and years, and they still didn't get it. They still haven't been paid for their work. So I like to put out a resource there, the Documentary Producers Alliance, DPA here in the US. And it's they're an organization of documentary producers based here in the US, but what they did was they established a set of waterfall guidelines, which are essentially guidelines for filmmakers to use when they are working with investors. So if a filmmaker does want to work with an investor, they can go into a meeting informed in regards to like what is fair. And of course, if you are dealing with an investor, you want to get an attorney involved, because you should do that to protect yourself. But these waterfall guidelines provide like a general how to, like what you need to know, because a lot of filmmakers were getting into agreements that they really didn't understand what they were, because like Renee said, that a lot of people are very well versed in the creative of the work, but they're not really well versed in the business side. So these waterfall guidelines were established to kind of give some guidance to filmmakers in that realm. And I just want to kind of speak to fundraising opportunities here in the US and Europe, particularly to Caribbean filmmakers, because there are funds available out here. If people go to documentary.org, there's a really great grants database where you can look for funds based on where you live, the type of filmmaker you are, whether you're emerging or mid-career, the stage of production that you're in, whether it's development, production, post-production. There's also even more money becoming available for impact as well. If you want to have if your project has a component of impact producing. What I recommend is that people, if they are going to be applying for grants and funds, is to set up a grant, see which funds you're eligible to apply for and set up a calendar so you know when the deadlines are coming. And then if you do have questions about something in a particular proposal, like you're not sure how you should word something, it's perfectly okay to reach out to that funder. Just don't do it like 3 weeks before the grant deadline, because that's when everybody is reaching out to the funder and they really won't have any time to probably talk to you about it. And definitely not the day of. I've had that happen before. Like, no, like your phone and your email just starts blowing up. It's like, there's just no way you could do it. But setting up a calendar and organizing that way so you know when you need to reach out to folks is just another practical step that you can use, particularly if you are applying for funds. And in addition to applying for documentary funds, there are also markets you can attend. So there are markets out there in the US and in Canada and Europe that you can apply to, where you have the opportunity to meet as many as 20 to 30 decision makers. And different markets have different guidelines. So, for example, Doc Leipzig in Germany, they tend to work with projects that are earlier in development, whereas IDFA tends to work with projects that are more in the production phase. Also, RDIM in Montreal has a very good market for those of you who are in the Francophone world. So if you're a French speaker, that's a great market for you as well. And here in the US, there's a National Association of Latino Independent Producers. So if you're coming from a Caribbean country that's Spanish speaking, that could be a great opportunity, a great place for you to meet with not only funders, but also potential distributors. So I know that was a lot, but.
Well, that was really invaluable, Tony. Speaking of Spanish speakers, at this point, Jesus, I wanted to ask you about your own experiences of producing and working on film content between New York and Cuba. I wondered if you could share with us your own observations of what tends to make content, and in particular looking at Caribbean film content, more investment worthy. In your experiences with funders or grant makers, etc., what have you tended to find makes a better sell?
Yeah, thank you, Nadia. And I'm really happy to be here with everyone. I can say that listening to Nick and Renee, listening to them, was really enlightening of what in Cuba, Cubans do not have. Because up until a year, it was illegal to even make independent films in Cuba. And there was no film commission in Cuba whatsoever. And the independent film community has been making movies mostly out of nowhere and no money for the last 20, 30 years, but the films have been out there. There's almost no private investment in Cuba. There is almost no grant making in Cuba. And most of the movies have relied on co-productions. The most known case is One of the Dead, that won the Goya Award for Best Ibero-American Film and launched Alejandro Burgues' career. And he's actually right now in Hollywood directing. And there have been really few examples of Cuban independent cinema, although in the last 5 years, the same Tony was mentioning that has happening with the documentary in the US, has been happening with a certain team of independent filmmakers, mostly in Europe. Like film programmers from Europe have been picking up and headhunting filmmakers from Cuba and giving them exposure. And I think that has been happening in the Caribbean pretty much. They've been in Berlin, it's been happening in Rotterdam. And thanks to that, the Cuban independent cinema has been thriving and going to places. But there is a lot of disconnection in the island actually right now in the creative sector and the financing sector. Although in the last year, there was a Cuban Film Fund created by the Cuban Film Institute that has been allowing Cuban independent filmmakers to legalize their work and do what they do. But just until the last few years, like the Norwegian embassy, for instance, or the World Cinema Fund created funds specifically for Cuba to finance those films in the island. In my experience in the diaspora, living now in New York, and working mostly in the nonprofit sector in the past 3 years, like I've begun to realize that sadly, the region uh, culturally in the US, it's really common to apply for grants and like seek foundation, private foundation money. Like that's not really common in a region. Like we mostly look for corporate or product placement or financiers, but like I think most of the, like for instance, like Ford Foundation, like Just Films that have an open application year round, like many Caribbean filmmakers do not know or do not apply to Just Films as they should, because perhaps they do not know about it. Like I think we should kind of think out of the bubble, like out of the box and burst our bubbles to kind of like do the research to look for those like Rockefeller, for instance, Rogers Fund, and they work in Central America and the Caribbean. They do have program officers working in each of our countries or working for the region based in Mexico or in a country in Central America. And they do fund and finance films as well. So reach out to those program officers to know like their guidelines as well. I can as a stretch, as Tony was mentioning, like do have the same way you apply for film festivals, do create a calendar to apply for grants, like and in the US and abroad. Like they're and do not wait until last minute. Like for instance, like I know right now, like the San Francisco International Film Festival, for instance, has application open for all over the world. Like how many Latinx, Latinos, and Caribbean filmmakers do apply to the San Francisco International Film Festival or the Pearl Lawrence grant that's actually also open right now. I know we tend to look a lot to Europe, like Forum just created a new initiative, Producers Connection, and that's just new. That just happened today. They announced it today. And Cannes is being more accessible than ever virtually. And those initiatives are great, but we need to keep creating these spaces to kind of keep coming together and see how we can interconnect all the initiatives we have in our countries to do art the films.
It's really interesting what you say about funding or non-existent funding up to a year ago in Cuba. And it seems that the unique political circumstances of the island has kind of created this appetite internationally, which some might say is even slightly unhealthy because perhaps it then is pushing particular types of narratives from filmmakers in Cuba. But in terms of looking at the other sort of Spanish-speaking islands in the region, you've referenced grants and opportunities in North America. To what extent have you seen much collaboration in terms of formal, informal sort of co-productions amongst the Spanish-speaking islands in the Caribbean or regions, in the Caribbean?
I think, for instance, like Creative Capital, like is probably one of the very few organizations in the US that finance independent artists since the National Endowment for the Arts was not doing that. And if you look at Creative Capital work, and they do work with a lot of BIPOC artists and filmmakers, they do work a lot with filmmakers in the diaspora, and they do finance a lot of filmmakers in the diaspora, and they give like 50 grants of $25,000 every year. So that's money that's coming out there. Like Bill Lawrence, like it's open for all over the world, and it goes from $15,000 to $25,000 like per project. So there are opportunities out there. Like I've been in New York, Independent Filmmakers Project that just changed to be the Gotham, actually has an industry week, like it's pretty much a market. And if you look at the projects, like there's a lot of Puerto Rican films coming in there from Costa Rica, from Central America, Spanish speaking, and also French speaking as well, and English speaking projects coming in that you didn't see that before. But also because the industry and the landscape is changing, and the demands and like are changing also in the country. Like you see a lot of industry and decision makers like looking at the region in a different way because there is opportunity to create content because they need it, but also to make money.
And certainly in all that you've said, I want to again encourage our audiences, particularly some of our Spanish speakers, to put their questions in Spanish in the chat. They'll be translated, and we'd love to be able to feed them in. But lastly, Jesus, I wondered if I could pick your brains about your experiences of pitching. and things that you found were helpful or not helpful when you were trying to access opportunities and funds. Particularly, you're bilingual, but sometimes people who may not be speaking English as their first language and might be dealing with North America maybe feel that they are, maybe not as confident, or that they're going to be at a disadvantage.
I would say this is nothing new to anybody. Like, network as much as you can anywhere you can. And now in the world we're living in this digital world, like, all the decision makers can go everywhere. And when people go to places, they do go with a different set of mind, and they're open to listen and to interconnect. And it might be like, you might not speak English, but there's a way, like, we make things work. I was talking to a filmmaker from Venezuela who is here from Tribeca right now, actually, and he's having a short, and he's pitching a series at the festival at the moment. And he met a financier actually last week here in New York, and the financier told him, and the financier was from Spain, actually. It's like, what if this is not happening in Venezuela, but in Madrid? Would you do that? And he was like, oh, wait, hold on. And then, like, something clicked on him. It's like, what would we do if the subject travels to Spain, to Madrid? Like, how we could make that happen? So, like, we have to be thinking out of the box to develop our story, like to change it, like, and to always network and pitch, and to listen to who you talk to, because they might be an opportunity that you're not even thinking of when you just begin to have a dialogue with that person that you have in front of you. And that person that might be a decision maker might be overwhelmed, might be like listening to a lot of pitches, but when something clicks and they connect and they see it, like, they just will be open to just getting more out of you. So do not hesitate at all.
That's really encouraging.
Yeah, I just kind of want to reiterate Jesus's point, because and the importance of, like, making sure that you apply to and attend markets, because when I attend markets, sometimes I'll meet with 20 to 30 filmmakers, and I may not be able to do anything specifically for them. But if it's a project that I really like, I know people in the industry, and I will tell other people in the industry, hey, this person is applying for your fund, or you need to take a look at this. So this is part of building relationships. But also, I may not be able to assist you with this film, but maybe I may be able to assist you with your next film, because so it's just, that's really important to make sure you get yourself out there, make those introductions. And then I wanted to speak to the English speaking component, because I work with filmmakers regularly with Korea Communications Agency, helping them to do pitches. And a lot of them, for them, they don't speak English, or English isn't their first language. They have interpreters there. So we just allot extra time, additional time to have those conversations and to help prep them for the pitch, and then things like that. So, and I think when you're talking about this international market, people are really open to hearing the story, no matter what language is in, as long as there are people in place who can, like, help to make those interpretations. And KCA actually funds interpreters. So I recognize a lot of people may not have that in their budget, but that is one alternative. So
who is KCA?
Oh, KCA is Korea Communications Agency. It's specifically for Korean filmmakers, but I've done markets around the world where I'm meeting with filmmakers, and they have a translator there, because English isn't they may not speak English. No, not even their first language. They may not speak English. So
I would like to aggregate a little bit over that point. The festivals and the markets, they all have activities specifically to network, and they're announced in their booklets. Also, the list of participants is mostly available for everyone. So if you can research who you want to talk to, who there's an affinity with your subject, or the story that you want to convey, you can go straight to that person, have a very short, specific synopsis that conveys the tone and your motivation, and something can click on that person. Just be ready to use these opportunities, these cocktails, these markets, these happy hours. Every interaction can make a difference.
Yeah, that is so true. Networking is an art in and of itself. And certainly now with, so many things being online, it's like many of us are having to adjust to networking in a different way. Sebastian, I wondered what your own thoughts were about how filmmakers can successfully pitch themselves to high net worth individuals. You know, back in the day before the lockdown, some of us would find ourselves in situations, whether it be at social functions or at film markets, etc., where we might just bump into, someone who happens to be a high net worth individual or who happens to be, quite a significant person in a corporate or, someone who can basically help us to access that finance. What suggestions would you give about, filmmakers pitching themselves, putting themselves forward in informal situations, even trying to network themselves up so that they can be in conversations where they can draw in some of the necessary finance and financial support?
Good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to be there tonight with you all. Nadia, to give you an answer, I think it's someone earlier in the discussion talk about the necessity to build a team, and for me it's a very key element because it's really important to have a good producer, to have an access to the financing, and I think it's very important in France because we have a very established financing system, and to navigate inside, you have to know the system and to know all the tips to convince people to come on board for your project. In France, we have different kind of funds to support the talent in all the stage of the project, from the writing part to the distribution, and also for international sales, etc. All the steps are supported by the French system, from public and private funds. For me, my best advice I could give to filmmakers will be to have a strong team to 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 build a project, and to have the possibility to make a production.
And you've been producing for many years. You've worked on some, or you've worked on and developed some notable projects, which I'm hoping you might reference. But building a team, it can take time, and it's difficult to find good people. Like in your own experience, how long has it taken you to build a team, and where are some of the places that you've met some of the key personnel that are on your team?
Yes, it's not easy. It's not easy, and my position in France, it's so specific because we have a very specific focus with our company, and we are focused on project with a link with Africa, with Caribs, Asia, and people try to be in touch with me for this specific slot we have with the company. And to be honest, I think I'm someone very easy to contact. I'm on different social network. I can give easily my contact to people, and with my team we try to understand the project that the talent wants to do, and find a way to be the right partners for this project. And it means with a strategy in terms of script development, in terms of financing, to find the right partner, and to share our experience about the fact, the financing system in France, in Europe, and to contribute to create a financing system in Africa, because we are also based in Africa. And the company strategy is to to combine all this financing to permit to people and talent to have project with the financing we deserve for the movies, and also if we succeed to do that, we can give to these movies the possibility to touch a large audience in all the territory involved in the project, and maybe more, because with the platform, with all this new technology, we have the possibility to touch a large audience if we succeed to keep the DNA of this project, but in the same time to have something very universal through characters and story we want to tell. So it's for me, it's not complicated to be in touch with me, and when we succeed to be in touch with talent, we just try to find the right way to help them to tell the stories.
So does that mean that some of the filmmakers who are watching this now can just reach out to you? They can hit you up on social media. Is that your invitation?
Yes, it's an invitation, because I think it could be very simple, and we try to give an answer to all the people who try to be in touch with us, and to share our experience, and give an answer very quickly if it's for me or not, and if it's for us, we try to find a way to produce or co-produce the project.
And you referred to projects that you have worked on in the Caribbean. I wondered if you could just tell us a bit more, you know, the title of the projects, what they were about, and how you managed to raise finance for them, and even which islands in the Caribbean.
Yes. I produced the second feature film of Jean-Claude Barny, who's a French director who come from the French island Guadeloupe, and it was a project a bit difficult to produce, because it's a movie with 5 Black men in the main cast, and it was and all these actors were not famous, so it was a kind of risk when I decided to produce the movies, and I tried to follow the vision of the director during this production, and it means that some partners who could come on board decide to not come on board, because because the movie has to represent this part of the French history about the Bumidom, who was a kind of system to it's a bit complicated to explain, but it's a French history.
What's the title? Sorry, can you repeat the title of the film?
It's The Gang of Caribbeans. It's available on Netflix, and when I produce this movie, most of the partners decide to not come on board, because it was a complicated movie with 5 Black guys not famous, and we decide to produce the movie. We succeed to do that, and to produce this movie, we succeed to convince the Caribs regional fund in France to come on board. We succeed to convince some very specific broadcasters to come on board, to involve some regional distributor on the financing of the project, and at the end, we succeed to combine many partners to come on board to produce the movie, more than usual, because in France you can produce a movie with 3 or 4 partners, and I think for this movie we succeed to have something like 15 partners with different level of financing to build this production for 1.5 million of euro. And the first budget was 5 million of euro. So we have to do some very strong choice, but for us it were necessary to produce the movie because it was a bad signal for all the people who want to direct and produce this kind of movie in France to not produce the movie. So it was a real adventure, and now we are working on the third feature film of the director, and it's still the same story.
Wow. So basically what you're saying is that you brought the funds together through informal financing.
Yes.
Did you say, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Thank you, Sebastian. It's helpful in terms of context to kind of hear about some of what's happening in terms of French-speaking islands in the Caribbean. So I've got a few questions now that have come through. I'm just going to read them out and put them out to the panel as a whole. Anyone who thinks that they can answer them, please step up. So we've got a question which is as follows. In the case of Puerto Rico, the Film Commission was reduced to a simple film program dedicated primarily to selling to the United States as a filming destination. Is it possible to form co-production agreements outside of the state or between the state and a filmmaking organization? So I think this is kind of talking about Puerto Rico and perhaps parts of the Caribbean where maybe it's just being directed to North America. I wondered if anyone had any experience in that area or any thoughts about that question.
Well, I'll just jump on that briefly because that does seem like two separate ideas as well. I mean, obviously, on the one hand, if the Nika had also mentioned this earlier that a film commission might be the one that has responsibility for managing the incentives, and from an incentive perspective, there's two ways about what is it that you are incentivizing. Are you incentivizing the attraction of films to a destination because you're trying to result in employment, or you're trying to result in, contribution to GDP for that territory? Or is it that your incentive regime is geared towards actually developing a local economy and a local ecosystem and creating new opportunities? And I mean, obviously in Puerto Rico's case, there have been some shifts in what they're currently able to deliver on. But I had mentioned earlier that you do not need to have a treaty in place in order for you to be able to pull together. I mean, you had called it, Nadia, informal financial structures. And I mean, that's part of it. You need to be able to have soft money, yes, which would be the case of your incentive or your funders, your grants, those kinds of things. But then there's also other types of financing that you need to be able to pull together. And there's multiple ways to do that. And I think this is exactly where it comes into place with understanding the larger scheme of things, the larger ecosystem that is available out there. Because in some cases, you can outreach to, you can get a minimum guarantee. I mean, I know that that's not really so much done anymore, but there's that type of financing. There is pre-sales as a form of financing. You're looking at your grant funding. You're looking at your, friends and family. You're looking at soft funding. You're looking at equity or debt, or there's so many other ways. There's in Dominican Republic, they also do, I guess it's a similar type of incentive, like a cap and trade. So, you would technically have an incentive that you can now defer to a different entity, to a local production company. So it really does depend on how you want to structure it, but with the idea that you don't have to follow official treaty regulations. It's basically like, you just got to find the money. There's many ways to find the money. So you just need to be super creative and find the different ways that you can put that financing package together.
Thank you, Renee. That's brilliant. So that question was from Kiki Cubero Garcia. He's one of our Caribbean Film Academy fellows. We've got another question from another fellow, Fellini. The question is, if your film commission and association are short of resources, human, technical, financial, then how can one bridge the gap to reach outside of the entities that only want to speak with FC or NGOs? So this is another question from one of our Caribbean Film Academy fellows. I wonder if there was anyone who was prepared to take a punt.
The question is around the idea that the Film Commission is not resourced.
That's right, yeah. So if you are trying to normally operate through your Film Commission, they're not maybe resourced or being particularly supportive. How can you bridge the gap if you're wanting to, say, do something with another territory?
I think there is value, even if a film commission happens to be under-resourced. I think there is still value that a film commission, as the entity that is responsible for the film industry, I think there's still value that the film commission can bring, even if it's just through, and has been raised by my colleagues on the panel several times, the question of networking and the network. The film commission perhaps may have access to people or to organizations that they can connect them to, even if they can't provide grant funding, even if there isn't an incentive. Try to leverage the network that the Film Commission itself might have to be able to find some of the resources that you might be looking for. I also wanted to take the opportunity to mention, again, based on the question of networking, we may not have the opportunity at this time to go out to film festivals, even when things sort of calm down. There may be challenges with traveling to festivals, and I think leveraging the digital version of festivals, perhaps for the next couple of years, is also a great option. The fact that this is happening at all, even under these circumstances, is quite amazing. And so I would say continue to reach out to the people that you find in these digital spaces. And even it may, as you had mentioned, or as someone had mentioned, it may not be something that happens in the initial conversation, but it could be a link that perhaps I'll think about you 6 months down the road when something comes up that makes sense. And I also want to mention another resource that I think Temba is going to share with the audience. There is an online resource called Stage 32. It's stage32.com. And I'm mentioning them because they were actually built for the purpose of networking within the entertainment industry digitally. That's what they were set up for 11, 12 years ago. And their value as a networking and educational resource has certainly become even more important in the last year to 15 months, where this is what creators in the industry have had to do. In my previous role, I worked with them, and I think they're an amazing resource, not just for that online networking side of things, but also for education. They offer a lot of online courses and short courses, and the people that they bring into their network tend to be very, very willing to share information, to again, you can meet someone online, and I'll mention as well, it's over for 500,000 members across the world. So if you think about that, people who are working in this industry across all the different types of jobs and roles could potentially be on this space, and the networking is very active. And it's something I would also mention, even if you're, there's a festival 6 months down the road, you could start networking on Stage 32 today. So that's something I would recommend.
Yeah, such a strong resource. So we've got another question from one of our fellows, Gabriela Figueredo.
Sorry, Nadia, before we go to the next question, I think both Tony and I wanted to add additional resources, right? Tony,
Yes.
I saw you
Yes.
unmuting.
Yes.
Okay.
Quick fire.
Yeah.
So we're now in our last 10 minutes and the questions are coming in.
Well, I just wanted to make it clear to everyone, particularly our fellows who are from the Caribbean, that the U.S. does not do formal co-production treaties. That is something that does not happen here. So when you're talking about reaching out to potential partners in the U.S., that's something you're going to be doing like on an individual basis with an individual producer or a production company. And there are resources to find those people. I'll just state a few of them. Browngirls.mafia has a database online for women of color around the world, primarily US based, but it is growing internationally. Also, if you're a filmmaker with a disability, there's Forward Docs. And in the next few months, coming in October, Kin Theory, which is run by Neotero, is actually setting up a database that will go live for Indigenous content creators as well.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you.
And then I just wanted to add another resource, which is IEFTA. It's IEFTA. The acronym slips me right now, but it's like it's the International Emerging Film and TV. But essentially their function is they literally scour the globe and they are cherry picking high potential talent from underrepresented communities. And they are assisting people to get financing so that they can attend labs, or creating opportunities, introducing them to networks, and introducing them to financing partners and stuff like that. So again, this is going to be, it's merit based, but if you really have what it takes, and there are the resources that are out there that are they're looking for you. These resources are looking for you as much as you're looking for them.
That's super. So I've got a question.
Another one is Show Me the Fund. Take a look at that.
Thank you, Fanny. Is that a fund that you've personally accessed?
It's an engine of fund, different funds. So you can take a look at that.
Okay, so I note that some of this information is being shared in the chat, so I hope our audiences are being able to access the information. So just swiftly moving on then, this question that I have from Gabriella, one of our fellows. So her question is, do you need to have a film finished or in production to attend a market? Will funders be interested in pitches? So this is presumably for a product that may be part finished or maybe hasn't been started.
Yeah, it depends. Each market is different. But for example, Doc Leipzig, they have a market that is for projects that are in development. But for projects that get into for films that get into Doc Leipzig that are finished, they actually have a distribution market. I think it's called Distribution Rendezvous. So you just have to kind of read the guidelines. But most markets where you're going to like pitch your films are for films that are in development and production.
Wonderful. So I've now got some questions from members of the public. So Kathy Kareem has asked, do our panelists have an opinion on whether the current funding landscape is more favorable for documentaries or scripted narrative projects? So just to repeat that, do our panelists have an opinion on whether the current funding landscape is more favorable for documentaries or scripted narrative projects?
Tony, you're gonna go?
Yeah. Well, there's always more funding for scripted projects because that's the nature of the beast. But these are two very different worlds. So there are funds that are specifically for your scripted features, and then there are funds that are specifically documentaries. So particularly here in the U.S., those worlds do not interconnect. They're different entities that support those different types of projects. So.
And I think just to add to that, so internationally, what I've been seeing just based on how people are funding is that there is an increasing global interest and global demand in doc content that, 2 decades ago, it was a little bit more difficult to identify where that audience is going to land. But I think we are definitely entering a world where social impact is much more important to audiences. And so you actually are finding financiers becoming more interested in it because they feel like it's becoming less risky to be a part of a documentary project.
And just very quickly, Renee, what is social impact for those who are not familiar with the term?
Well, I don't want to give the broadest definition, but I mean, social impact would be looking at content that's looking at underrepresented communities. It's content that is looking at, socioeconomic challenges. It's content that's looking at identifying new narratives. It's content that is giving us a new perspective on what we consider a mainstream world.
Wonderful. So I've just got a few more questions that I want to whiz through as we approach the last few minutes of the session. So Saxo to Earth has asked, what would be the best route for financing in France for people who are from the overseas territories? So I'm taking that to mean people who are in the Francophone diaspora in the Caribbean who want to access financing in France. I wondered if anyone could step up to that. Sebastian, I'm thinking of you. I don't know if there's anything that comes to mind.
Yes. For this type of profile, we have French speaking fonts. We have the international organization of French speaking territories who could be one of the support for this kind of project. We have the Young Creation Speaking French Territories Fund, was a fund supported by many private and public partners who could be interesting. And we have also a World Cinema Fund in France.
Did you want to give the French names?
The French names?
Yeah, for those funds that you mentioned.
Cinéma du Monde.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's the French name for the World Cinema Fund, and for the other fund is l'Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, et le Fonds pour la Jeune Création Francophone. And you can also have an access to all the fund if the project is a French-speaking project. You just need to have the right co-producer, and you can have an access, because included in our regional fund we have some, for example, some development fund for international project. So we have a lot of possibilities if the main language in the movie is French, and if the language is another language in the movie, you have the World Cinema Fund in France.
That's really good, thank you. So we're rapidly running out of time. I've got two more questions that I want to put to you, Renee, as we sort of run over the finishing line, so to speak. So the first question is, what career advisory would you give? So this is a question from On Point Pictures, and it's, what career advisory would you give to someone who wants to learn and practice the business of film? Should they mix becoming a producer and an entertainment lawyer? And then the second question is, what specific action are you taking to bring to life your intention of developing more film business? And this is from Kathy Kareem. So in terms of some of what you mentioned about filmmakers perhaps being a bit more business savvy, I suppose what are some of the ways in which maybe the Jamaican Film Commission are supporting that? But the first question was really about the practice of learning the business of film.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I think I'm so glad that this question came up, because it really is an important avenue. We do need to have more people who do have that business skill set. And so, you know, definitely doing that combination of producing, including a little bit of entertainment law in there. There are also degree programs that are geared specifically towards the business of the creative economy. So you can pursue this academically as well as pursue it based on like actually working on the ground and making sure that you have that that hands-on experience. I think there are degree programs that are related to accounting. So sort of like tax specializations for the creative economy, those types of programs do exist as well. So personally, I have an MBA in arts management and a master's in communications and cultural policy, specialized in innovation and like design. So, you know, there definitely are these opportunities from an academic, like if you want to pursue it formally. But then, yeah, working with and shadowing with entertainment law side of it, production side of it, business management. I think anyone who's in like an MBA program, you can really specialize. I've had a lot of conversations with people who have been in finance and who have said, you know what, yeah, I understand finance and accounting, but they really have a passion for being a part of the creative economy. So I think that that's a really good avenue. And then in terms of the what we're doing in Jamaica, so yeah. I mentioned starting out, you know, a lot of the initiatives that we're able to do are with support from international donor funds. So, you know, we work with places like the World Bank, with the IDB, with the Caribbean Development Bank. So a lot of these larger international donor funds are the ones that are providing us with the support to be able to deliver these types of initiatives. One of the initiatives that we delivered in terms of, you know, bringing the financing ecosystem up to speed was we've done this selection process for, as I'd mentioned, a cadre of finance professionals, and these are representatives from commercial banks, angel investors, venture capital, high net worth individuals, as well as, you know, other types of funding agencies. And, you know, for example, we took them to LA, and we had a series of peer-to-peer meetings with film financiers in LA to be able to help our Caribbean financiers better understand the monetization process and what's in it for you. How do you actually make money out of these businesses? So, you know, we've been able to look at where the gaps are in terms of what our financial ecosystems are able to provide, and just the general understanding that they have of the creative sector. And we've been able to supplement some of that either through direct peer-to-peer knowledge exchange or through networking opportunities. We host pitch sessions and investment forums where it's only creatives who are pitching to financiers. We do business-to-business meetings. So it's all a variety of different opportunities that are really helping to give investors and financiers a better handle on how to make good decisions with the creative economy, and also getting creatives to better understand how to speak to and how to engage with and how to convince an investor. And thankfully, we've been able to do that with the support of international donor funds.
Perfect. So what a note to end on. Sadly, we've got to the point now where I'm going to have to bring this session to a close. I'd like to graciously thank my panel members and audiences who've joined us for this Funding and Financing in the Caribbean, presented in partnership with Playgo Emerge and Digicel. So for those of you who are watching, please keep an eye out for the Playgo Emerge and Digicel competition, which is launching on July the 1st, which is looking for some of the best short form videos from across the Caribbean. Last but not least, we must give a special thank you to Romola Lucas, Jonathan Ali, and Justin Blaze, the original founders of the Caribbean Film Academy. Chloe Wallace, Temba Bebe, Alicia Cristiani, Sergio Lobo Navia, Lauren Monzon, and Janine Charles Ferre. These are all other members of the team who have been working behind the scenes tirelessly to bring this event together. So for those of you who are tuned in, please do come back tomorrow, where we're going to be looking at distribution pathways for independent filmmakers from the Caribbean or who are working on Caribbean cultural content. That's taking place at 6 p.m. EST, and it's going to be moderated by myself. And if you want to find out more about other workshops, please visit the Caribbean Film Academy section of the Third Horizon Film Festival website. So that's www.thirdhorizonfilmfestival.com. Goodbye.